On this vote, the yeas are 57, the nays are 43. Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this amendment, the amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, would it be in order for me to speak as if in morning business for up to 5 minutes at this point?
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's been said that no one is indispensable, and that may be true, but next week we'll test that theory after the departure of my Chief of Staff, Lisa Wolski. Lisa has been on my whip staff since January of 2003. She started as tax counsel in my personal office because I serve on the Finance Committee, and then moved to the whip office in late 2007. She's more than, we refer to people around here as staffers. That name doesn't begin to encapsulate what we think of those people who work with us every day and provide us with all of the things that we need to try to be successful. And that certainly is Lisa Wolski. She is and always has been one of my most trusted advisors. She is the gold standard of expertise and professionalism. Everything I've asked her to do, she's done and done well. But more importantly, she brings to me the things that she thinks that I should be thinking about, and more often than not, that's exactly what I end up doing. She knows what she's talking about. She knows what I want and what I need. Those who work with her know she's smart, she's articulate, and through her mastery of complex policies and political savvy, she's accomplished great things in my whip office during the time that I've been whip. And I can't tell you the number of people who have told me over the last several weeks since they learned that she would be departing how much they're going to miss working with her. Other than her extraordinary competence and work ethic, one of the many reasons I'll miss her is because, as I said, I think she and I think a lot alike, and that's not because she accommodated her views to mine, but because she came to her views separately from a basis of understanding and reason and experience and knowledge, and it happens that our views generally coincide. That is a happy coincidence for member and staff, and in my case, to have a Chief of Staff who shares those views with me has made my job much, much easier, and it makes work much more comfortable to be able to work in great harmony with someone on whom you rely. She instinctively knows what I will think about a particular issue, and she's always been there with good counsel and advice. And I just want to conclude by saying that Lisa Wolski leaves behind, I think, a great example for all of the other staff people who work here, as well as the legacy of achievement and professionalism. I know that she will be a great success in her new job. She doesn't need good luck. Her new employer will be very fortunate to have her wise counsel, undoubtedly more than they even know at this point. But I do know that here in the Senate we are going to miss Lisa Wolski very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
I would ask the chair, could you please inform me when I've spoken 10 minutes? And for other people that want to speak, I don't think I'll speak.
Chair will notify you at 10 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you. My amendment number 860 is a good government amendment that I hope we can get broad support. Now, there are special interests here in Washington making the rounds opposing this amendment. These groups have argued that this amendment will unduly burden the Justice Department, take away grant money for worthy causes, and erroneously ban grantees from future funds. Well, these special interests are trying to protect their income stream of federal grants and don't want somebody looking over their shoulder to make sure that they're spending taxpayers' money wisely. This amendment is a response to the lack of oversight, accountability, and responsibility for how American taxpayers' dollars are spent by grant recipients. It is a response to my work in the Judiciary Committee on covering frauds, misappropriation of funds, offshore bank accounts by nonprofit organizations. Now, can you understand that? Nonprofit organizations in America have offshore bank accounts and many other shenanigans occurring in grant programs administered by the Justice Department. To fix this, My amendment includes an accountability and fraud prevention package for grants administered by the Department. I'm glad to report that the National Taxpayers Union, an independent, nonpartisan advocate for taxpayers, support the amendment. For the last decade, the Inspector General has continuously labeled grant management at the Department of Justice a top management and performance challenge. That's from the Inspector General. Despite the large sums of money the Department provides to grantees, the Inspector General has repeatedly found inadequate controls on spending, inadequate oversight, and general failure to ensure that taxpayers' dollars are spent by grantees in accordance with the programs. Each year, the Inspector General audits only a small fraction of grants awarded by the Department. In fact, last year, the Inspector General has audited 21 grant recipients. Now, keep that figure 21 in mind. The Inspector General questioned more than 1/4 of all the taxpayers' dollars these grantees receive. These questions occurred on a random selection of grantees and represent less than 1% of the total grants. So we only go over 1%. But that 1%, 25% of them were found to have a waste of taxpayers' money or not proper accounting. Perhaps the most concerning part of these audits is that they are randomly selected. If the Inspector General's random selection of audit grantees universally uncovers unauthorized expenditures and other errors, then you can easily see why we have a much, much larger problem. If the findings of the audit from 2011 were extrapolated through all the grants, that would mean nearly $500 million in questionable costs annually. My amendment requires the Inspector General to audit 10% of the grants. It also requires the Attorney General to ban grantees for 2 years if they're found to have serious problems that have gone unremedied for longer than 6 months after the Inspector General makes a negative finding. By requiring this remedy within 6 months, it ensures that there is enough time to fix inadvertent mistakes, but also ensures that truly bad actors are taken off the government rolls. My amendment also requires the AG to reimburse the Federal Treasury from the Justice Department budget if funds are given to an excluded entity, and then requires the Department to recoup lost grant money from those grantees. It also includes a limitation on conference spending at the Department. Now, just a few weeks ago, the Inspector General issued an audit on conference spending at the Department. We all heard about this audit, which revealed $16 muffins, $32 Cracker Jack snacks, $5 cans of Coda, the beef Wellington appetizers, and other incredible uses of taxpayers' money by the Justice Department. What we haven't heard is how, under this administration, conference spending at the Justice Department increased from $47 million in fiscal year 2008 to 1 year later, $73 million, and now, 2 years later, $91 million. Despite the biggest federal deficit in history, the Justice Department under this administration has doubled spending on conferences in just 2 years. This is unacceptable, and it is why my amendment requires the Deputy Attorney General to sign off on all conference spending. My amendment would prohibit the Attorney General from providing any grant to a nonprofit charity that holds money in offshore bank accounts for the purpose of evading federal taxes. Now, is there anything wrong with not having a nonprofit organization? If it's nonprofit, you'd think they'd be using their money for nonprofit purposes. This provision was a result of an investigation that I conducted into the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, the national umbrella organization for thousands of local clubs. In response to my inquiry, the Boys and Girls Clubs of America admitted that despite closing hundreds of clubs nationwide, it held nearly $222 million in investment, of which $54 million was in offshore investments and nearly another $54 million in partnerships. When asked why this money was held offshore, I was told it was held to, quote, avoid issues with unrelated business income tax generated by hedge funds that use leverage, end of quote. Now I support the mission of the Boys and Girls Clubs. Truly I do. And it is true that nothing they did here was illegal. However, given our current fiscal crisis, I cannot support federal tax dollars being awarded as grants to those who hold millions of dollars offshore. I should say tens of millions of dollars offshore. Finally, I'll note that my amendment includes a 25% matching requirement for grantees. As I have heard, the special interest lobbyists have been calling and sending panic messages to many members in the Senate opposing the matching requirement, arguing that it would shut off federal money to many grantees. This provision mirrors one recently included at a Judiciary Committee markup supported by all Judiciary Committee Democrats and some Republicans. Matching requirements are often required by grant programs that virtually all members have supported. The Government Accountability Office even reported in a 2006 report on grant management that to strengthen grant management, Congress should, quote, ensure mechanisms are of sufficient value, end of quote, when implementing grants. This is the GAO speak for including a matching requirement so grantees are financially involved, not simply spending federal taxpayers' dollars. Now, that said, Mr. President, I wanted to modify my amendment and strike this provision. However, I understand that people on the other side of the aisle objected to that request so it would be easier to defeat my amendment. Remember, this was an amendment that Republicans and Democrats accepted in the Judiciary Committee. This is big money at stake with federal grants. And talk about special interests, the special interest is FOCA. Those who oppose my amendment oppose holding grantees accountable for how they spend taxpayers' dollars. Those who oppose my amendment are supporting giving nonprofit charities with money in offshore bank accounts taxpayer dollars. It will be interesting to see who opposes this provision, especially given the fact that everyone should oppose giving taxpayer dollars to those who hold money offshore. My amendment is a common-sense way to ensure that taxpayers' dollars are protected. It is something we should have done long ago. I encourage all my colleagues to join me and send a signal that waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayers' dollars has no place in a federal grants program at the Department of Justice. That would include all of them, but particularly to organizations that hold money offshore to avoid taxes. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, when our American government spends money on infrastructure, core infrastructure, we should look first to American companies and American workers. But this doesn't always happen. In fact, recently there was a bid proposal in Alaska to build a bridge with America's taxpayers' money, and a Chinese company employing Chinese steel outbid the American company using American steel. And this was a big surprise in that normally there is a framework that helps ensure that American companies and American workers are able to do the projects, infrastructure projects we're funding with our taxpayer dollars. So we're creating jobs here at home. Well, it turns out that there is a loophole. Whereas this basic framework covers highways, it covers commuting rail, covers passenger rail, doesn't apply to freight rail. And this was a freight bridge that on tracks that don't also have passengers trains on them. I don't know how many tracks in America only have freight and not passenger, but when everything got sorted out through the appeal process, that's what it came down to. So this afternoon, we'll have a simple amendment that makes this piece of the infrastructure world consistent with the rest of the infrastructure world. The industrial might of this nation was built on American railroads made from American steel. Now, we often say, wow, there's a loophole you could drive a freight train through. In this case, you actually can drive a freight train through the loophole. So that is what we need to fix. At a time when Americans everywhere are searching for jobs, we should be supporting American companies that employ and hire Americans, use American steel when American taxpayer dollars are employed. Now, in the framework for infrastructure, there are some exceptions. And those exceptions that are in this amendment are exactly the same exceptions that are provided in the rest of the infrastructure picture. That is, the Secretary of Transportation can waive this requirement for U.S.-produced steel, iron, and manufactured products if the application is inconsistent with the public interest. That's a pretty broad grounds on which the Secretary can make a determination. Or, more specifically, if the materials and products are not available in sufficient quantity or quality from the American manufacturer. Or if the inclusion of the domestic material would increase the cost of the project by more than 25%. This is a small change that fills in or eliminates a loophole that you can drive a freight train through. And the bottom line is this. If we don't build things in America, we will not have a middle class in America. Our taxpayer dollars should go to create good living wage jobs for our workers here at home in these core infrastructure projects, not to create jobs in China. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. And, Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I'm unaware of the procedure right now. I think in the House I would say I would be striking the last word.
We're in a quorum call, sir.
Then I would ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call to speak as if in morning business for 3 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we all saw the news that yet to be confirmed that General Gaddafi is dead. This is a victory for our men and women in uniform, for the United States, for the administration, but most importantly for the people of Libya. Senator McCain, Senator Graham, Senator Rubio, and I had the privilege 20 days ago of traveling to Tripoli. I was quite surprised at what I saw. Being in other war zones, Tripoli did not appear to be one of them. The rebels took the capital largely intact. Only the Gaddafi compound was blown away. Anti-Gaddafi graffiti, obviously spontaneous everywhere. And some of the most popular people in the city were United States citizens. While many people in Libya did not fully know the position of Senator McCain, they knew he was an American leader. And throughout our visit, they came up to thank him for the aircraft that they saw overhead, that they felt equalized the battle between them and their government, between the professional army of Muammar Gaddafi and the people of Misrata, the people of Tripoli, the people of Benghazi. We have the makings of a very pro-United States ally here. Millions of Libyans right now are very thankful for the United States. They feel that the aircraft overhead that equalized this battle were almost all American. In reality, much of those aircraft were British and French from our NATO allies. But because of that pro-American feeling, the new government there is likely to be overwhelmingly pro-American. As we look to a now secure post-Gaddafi environment, we have to make several points. First, when we were there, leaders were obviously afraid that as long as he lived, Gaddafi could make a comeback. That now no longer looks possible at all. Secondly, to head off Islamicists who may try to form a party, the Prime Minister there, Jibril, wanted to call early elections. We should help him call early elections because right now the rebel TNC government is overwhelmingly popular and would be elected. Next, we have to unify military authority with the new rebel government. We were briefed that there are 28 separate militias in Tripoli. We should unify military command under them to make sure that any sectarian violence does not break out with the victory that has come at hand. Libya is a unique country which does not need foreign assistance from the United States. We've seized $34 billion of their dollars. Over $100 billion is seized account worldwide. They need assistance. They need medical backup, training for their army, support for their elections, but they can pay for it all. One thing they asked us that we should provide is a hospital ship. USNS Comfort should be allowed to go to Libya to care for those who were wounded in this battle. We were told 25,000 citizens of Libya died in this revolution. 60,000 were wounded. The United States should help care for them, and the Libyan government should reimburse us for that effort. When we look to the future, we also have a couple of key challenges. We were briefed that Gaddafi's chemical weapons stockpile was secure, and I think it is, but we need to keep it that way. We were also briefed that the arsenals of Libya were looted, including thousands of handheld surface-to-air missiles. It should be a top priority of the United States to buy or gain custody of those missiles again before they become a threat to civil aircraft around the world. In the end, as I said, this is a victory for the administration, for the men and women of the U.S. military, but especially the people of Libya. And if we take the steps that I just outlined, security for the chemical weapons arsenal, recovery of the surface-to-air missiles, support for early elections, and medical care with the provision of a U.S. hospital ship, I think we will lock in the winning of a new, very pro-U.S. ally in the Middle East. And with that, Mr. President, I yield back time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak on Amendment 874, my amendment on housing discrimination. My understanding is when we assemble for a series of votes at 2 o'clock, this vote will be voiced, and I particularly appreciate the work of Senator Collins, the ranking minority member of the subcommittee, and Chairwoman Patty Murray for her work, and Senator Sanders for his support and co-sponsorship. Housing discrimination, as we know, prevents hard-working families from buying homes in the neighborhood of their choosing. Housing discrimination not only violates federal law, it's a barrier to economic mobility. It's a morally wrong practice with real-world implications. A study by the Miami Valley Fair Housing Coalition, located in Dayton, Ohio, found that foreclosed properties in predominantly African-American neighborhoods in that city are kept in significantly worse condition than foreclosed properties in white neighborhoods. That's bad for local property values, and it's bad for the local governments that rely on property tax revenues, because we know what that does for home prices. That's why the Department of Housing and Urban Development instituted the Fair Housing Initiatives Program, so-called FIP. FIP invests in the private fair housing organizations that help enforce anti-discrimination laws. My amendment would put FIP funding on equal footing with the House legislation, increasing it near its fiscal 2011 level. It's exactly what the House did. This is about maintaining level funding so that fair housing organizations won't be forced to lay off hundreds of employees across the country. The amendment's effective. Fair housing organizations investigated 65% of the nation's complaints of housing discrimination, nearly twice as many as all government agencies combined. This amendment's efficient. It saves money by streamlining the claims investigation process. And my amendment's fully paid for, transferring money from HUD's Working Capital Fund. Discrimination should never be tolerated, and especially in these challenging economic times, it'd be particularly devastating to cut fair housing programs any further. I again want to thank Senator Murray and Senator Collins, the top two members, one in each party of the Transportation, Housing, Urban Development Committee. Subcommittee, I want to thank Senator Sanders for co-sponsoring the amendment. I urge a yes vote from my colleagues when this comes forward for a voice vote in a few minutes. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the 60 affirmative vote requirement under the previous order for the Brown Amendment number 874 as modified be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, on behalf of myself and 32 co-sponsors, both Republicans and Democrats, I ask unanimous consent that the current matter be set aside and Senate Amendment number 875 be called up and made.
Mr. President, I object. Objection heard.
Mr. President, I understand that there is an agreement regarding the disposition of amendments already in place, but I believe this amendment deserves consideration and a vote. It is a non-controversial matter as far as I'm concerned. It would simply make permanent 10 separate appropriations riders relating to firearms. The House CJS bill did the same thing, but these changes have been taken out of the Senate substitute amendment. Each of these riders has been in place for a long time, some more than 30 years. These clarifying provisions have been enacted year after year to preserve the rights of law-abiding gun owners and prevent encroachments on the part of the executive branch. It doesn't need to be a yearly exercise. There's widespread support for each of these provisions contained in my amendment. Once again, they have never been the subject of any significant controversy. My amendment would just simply make them permanent, so we don't have to bring them up all the time. This amendment would likely pass with more than 60 or 70 votes. I hope that the leadership and the managers on the other side of the aisle won't simply accede to the wishes of a minority of senators who are hostile to Second Amendment rights by preventing a vote on this amendment. So, Mr. President, I ask again for unanimous consent to set aside the pending matter and call up Senate Amendment number 875.
Mr. President, I object again.
We do have objection.
Mr. President, we have a good number of amendments already pending, and we have a list of amendments already in order to be made pending. Until we're able to dispense and dispose of some of these pending amendments, I must object.
Mr. President?
Objection is heard.
I hope to be able to work with my colleagues on the other side of on this. This shouldn't be a difficult exercise. It's just a smart thing to do. Once again, I'm certain that this amendment would have the support of a broad majority, bipartisan majority of my colleagues. If the other side wants to prevent a vote on this, keeping in mind that the vast majority of the American people support these provisions, I hope they'll be able to explain to their constituents. So I hope that there will be a reconsideration of this amendment and that we can get it up and get this matter solved once and for all. But I understand that this distinguished senator has to object, and I feel very disappointed in that. But sooner or later, we're going to vote on this amendment one way or the other.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
President, I just wanted to rise in my capacity as chair of the Judiciary Committee, say that I oppose Amendment 860. It's a one-size-fits-all approach. It would have catastrophic consequences on the Justice Department and the important work the Justice Department does in supporting local law enforcement, crime victims, and justice across the country. Now, I've worked with my good friend from Iowa, Senator Grassley, on many issues. We've been able to, in a bipartisan way, develop accountability measures to ensure that particular grants administered by the Department of Justice operate efficiently and effectively. That's particularly important in a time of budget austerity. We've done it in a specific context where the measures make a lot of sense. For example, in the course of our negotiations on a bipartisan version of the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, we worked out specific proposals there. But one size doesn't fit all. Measures that make sense in one program cannot willy-nilly be applied to others without careful consideration of the consequences of the programs and to the intended beneficiaries of local law enforcement crime victims. A one-size-fits-all matter actually might harm rather than help important functions of the Department of Justice. For example, this amendment would prevent grants to the Boys and Girls Club of America. Now, I know some have criticized some aspects of the Boys and Girls Club, and I'd be happy to work with any senator to work out these issues. The Boys and Girls Clubs of America do great work. I remember one police chief in my state when I asked if I could help him get a couple more police officers to help out because of crime problems. He said, no, give me a Boys and Girls Club. Give me a place for young people to go. I know in Vermont, they do a great deal, as they do in most states. If there are reforms that should be made, let's do them. But don't just cut out the funding in a one-size-fits-all way at a time when we're doing everything possible to give young people a different goal than going out into a life where they might do things none of us would agree with. This would greatly restrict the Department of Justice's ability to spend funds for salaries of its own people. Is that going to lead to huge cuts in prosecutors and agents? Are we going to be imposing a salary cap on top of the one that the President's already imposed? Are we going to be losing some of our best people? Are we going to be unable to develop experienced law enforcement officers or prosecutors? I know that in law enforcement and prosecution, you value experience. You don't want to go for the lowest common denominator. You want people who are experienced. So I wouldn't, again, a willy-nilly amendment does not help. The amendment includes a grant matching requirement. But in some programs, grant matching is not a good idea. Let me tell you about one. Legislation that former Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell and I put together, it's worked very well, is for the Leahy Bulletproof Vest Partnership Program for local jurisdictions. We have in some local jurisdictions the ability to waive matching provisions. Now, we've seen a rise in the number of assaults and murders of police officers across this country. Many officers' lives have been saved because they've had bulletproof vests under the Leahy program. They would have died otherwise. But they're in small departments in states that could not afford the $500 or $600 for a bulletproof vest. And yet we expect these police officers to be out at 3 o'clock in the morning, usually with no backup. But they're in a small rural part of West Virginia or Vermont or all these other states. They don't have any backup. They're out there alone. And we ought to give them the kind of protection they need. I want police officers in rural communities do not have the budget of a big city department to have this kind of protection. So if you put a matching requirement by fiat, again, one size fits all, we got a lot of rural police departments that are going to be badly, badly hurt. And what about crime victims? Crime victims who have already suffered great loss. Are we going to say, well, we can help you out, but pony up some money, pony up a matching requirement, and then we'll come in and help you. Now, we're going to spend a fortune on the guy we lock up who committed the crime. We'll spend $35,000 a year on that person. We're not going to ask for any matching money from the criminal. We're going to say to the victim, we can help you, but sorry, I know you lost all this money. I know you've been beaten, you're bruised, you've been injured, but you got to come up with some money before we can help you. The guy that did it, we'll take care of him. We'll pay for that. We can't help you. No. Mr. President, I was a prosecutor for 8 years. I know how these victims suffer. They are usually the forgotten person in the criminal justice system. The headlines are, so-and-so was arrested, they're marched off, we're going to prosecute them. And that's good. They should be. I prosecuted a lot of those people. But the victim is the one forgotten. And victims and others most in need of assistance are those least likely to provide matching funds. Rural communities, small nonprofit providers, tribes and states, they're facing their own problems, shouldn't have another funding mandate put on them from Washington. The new matching requirements and other requirements of this amendment impose new burdens on all money going to state and local law enforcement. So the COPS program and many of the Burn JAG programs. It prevents many police departments from hiring and keeping the officers they need. That's why the National District Attorneys Association and the National Association of Police Organizations have expressed their opposition to this amendment. At one time, I had the honor of serving as Vice President of the National District Attorneys Association. They care. They care about law enforcement. They care about prosecutors. They care about victims. We ought to listen to them. It also burdened grants awarded through the Debbie Smith Act to reduce backlogs in testing rape kits. You know, there are rapists that go free because we don't have the money to test the rape kits. Tell that to a victim. Tell that to the victim. We don't have the money to go get the person who did this. I'm not going to vote in a way that I'm going to be telling that victim, we can't help you. We can't test that rape kit. The Debbie Smith grant programs received bipartisan support. It helps to ensure that rape victims will not have to continue to live in fear. As somebody said, well, it's going to take a few months to test this because we don't have the money. By the way, lock your door, he might come back. I'm not going to vote for that. I'm not going to vote for that. The matching requirement will be devastating the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It works hard every day to keep our children safe from those who do them harm. And it's hard to think of any work more important than protecting our children from the evils of abuse and exploitation. But this amendment will make that work much harder because the National Center receives Justice Department grants, but it does not have matching funds. Mr. President, time's running out here, but I could tell you some stories. I could tell you some stories about what happens to these children who are exploited and abused, and it would have everybody here in tears. They do me when I saw them as a prosecutor, and it does every day when I read these reports as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My God, if we could protect people around the world, let's protect our children here at home. So I agree with Senator Grassley that we need rigorous accountability measures. Of course we should. We do this with our hearings every week in the Judiciary Committee. GAO does it. Inspector General does it. But don't do a one-size-fits-all that's going to say to our victims, They're going to say to rape victims. They're going to say to exploited children. We're going to say to our police officer who's told to go out there without a bulletproof vest but defend you and me in the middle of the night, sorry, 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 the wealthiest nation on earth can't help you. No, I oppose this amendment. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, there are now 2 minutes, equally divided prior to a vote in relation to amendments number 879 as modified, offered by the Senator from Oregon, Mr. Merkley.
Got through it, buddy.
Without objection. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heller. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Did you have Reed of Nevada voting no? He voted. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, no. Mr. Senators voting in the affirmative: Blunt, Brown of Ohio, Collins, Cole, Leahy, Mikulski, Pryor, and Sanders. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Mr. Inhofe. Senators voting in the negative: Chambliss, Coates, Coburn, Corker, DeMint, Inhofe, Isaacson, Johnson of Wisconsin, Lugar, Nelson of Florida, Paul, Rubio, and Wicker. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johans, no. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow, aye. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo, no. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran, no. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Manchin, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell. Aye. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, aye. Mrs. Hutchison, no. Mr. Kyle. Mr. Kyle, no. Mr. Roberts, no. Mr. Tester. Mr. Tester, aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Bingaman, aye. Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Ayotte, no. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, no. Mr. Heller, no. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Vitter, no.